What happens when a man with a badge thinks the law ends where his ego begins, and the woman he tries to humiliate turns out to outrank him in every way that matters? It started as a simple traffic stop on a quiet road in Pennsylvania, but one calm voice, one phone camera, and one courtroom changed everything. This isn't just about a cop and a soldier, it's about what happens when power finally meets accountability, and a black judge refuses to let silence win. Because sometimes justice doesn't shout, it stands up quietly and lets the truth speak for itself. And on that cold Wednesday night in Brooklyn County, that lesson was about to be written the hard way. A bored cop waiting for control. A lieutenant colonel just trying to get home. Two paths crossing under the same streetlight, and neither of them knew that before sunrise the whole town would be talking about what really happened on Hillside Parkway. The night began the way most bad nights do, quiet, uneventful, almost harmless. It was just past 11 p.m. in Brooklyn County, Pennsylvania, the kind of middle American stretch of road where the only sound came from tires humming against asphalt and the occasional whistle of wind through empty gas stations. Lieutenant Colonel Maya Carter had been driving for 2 hours straight, heading north from Camp Resolute. The base meeting had run late, as they usually did, full of logistics, reports, and a dozen people trying to make the same point louder than the last. Her shoulders ached under the weight of fatigue, but her mind was steady, disciplined in the way only 22 years of military service could teach a person. The black SUV she drove wasn't flashy. It was government issued, clean, quiet, tinted just enough to cut the glare of headlights behind her. Her playlist had run out 30 minutes ago, leaving only the rhythmic thrum of the engine and her own low hum keeping her company. She wasn't speeding, not drifting, just existing in that empty corridor of night where nothing ever seemed to happen. Until it did. At the edge of town, Sergeant Brian Kincaid sat in his cruiser, parked at the mouth of a dimly lit gas station. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. His phone screen glowed with the dull light of boredom, scrolling headlines, sports scores, a feed of half interest. 15 years on the force had carved deep grooves in his habits. Watch, wait, control. Nothing much moved on Hillside Parkway, which was how he liked it. Predictable, quiet, his kind of authority. Then he saw her, a black SUV with government plates gliding down the road like it belonged somewhere else. His eyes narrowed. "What's a car like that doing in my part of town?" he muttered. Before the thought was even finished, his thumb flipped the switch. The red and blue lights erupted behind her, cutting through the darkness like judgment. Maya saw the reflection before she heard the siren. She blinked once, then slowed the vehicle, guiding it carefully to the shoulder. Her pulse didn't spike. Her face didn't change. She'd been trained for worse. Deserts, deployments, decisions that carried lives in their margins. This was just another test of composure. Kincaid stepped out of his cruiser, the door slamming like a gunshot against the still night. The smell of oil and rain hung in the air. His boots hit the pavement heavy, one deliberate step after another. Flashlight in one hand, his other rested casually, too casually, on the holster at his hip. He didn't bother approaching the passenger side like standard protocol required. He went straight to her window. "License and registration." No greeting, no reason, just command. Maya rolled her window halfway down, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. Her voice was calm, low, respectful. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "You were drifting between lanes," he said, shining the light directly into her face. "Didn't signal. Looked like you might have been under the influence." Her jaw flexed slightly. "I wasn't." "License and registration," he repeated louder. She didn't argue. Every motion she made was slow, deliberate. The practiced choreography of someone who knew how fast misunderstanding could become tragedy. She reached into the glove box, retrieved her papers, and handed them through the window. "That's a government vehicle," she added. "I'm a federal employee returning from duty." Kincaid studied the ID, then smirked. "Military?" "Yes." "Doesn't mean you're above the law." "I never said I was." The silence between them stretched long and taut. He didn't like her composure. He didn't like that she met his gaze without flinching. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered. "Excuse me?" "Out of the car. I'm conducting a sobriety check." Her brows drew together slightly. "On what grounds?" "I've complied. I haven't been drinking. I'd like to know the reason." He took a step closer, voice sharpening. "You're refusing a lawful order." "No," she said evenly. "I'm asking for clarification." He didn't answer. He yanked the handle and opened the door himself, his shadow spilling into the cabin of her SUV. Maya glanced up at him once, then quietly reached for her phone on the center console. With a calmness that made him hesitate, she pressed record. "Just so we're clear," she said softly, "this interaction is being documented." For the first time that night, something flickered across his face. Hesitation, maybe, or awareness, but it vanished, as quickly as it came. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." She did. Her posture was straight, her movements measured. Even out of uniform, everything about her spoke of structure, of steadiness. The wind caught the edge of her jacket as she stood beneath the streetlight, the camera lens glinting faintly from her hand. Kincaid directed her to walk a straight line. She did. Perfectly. No stumble, no slur, no hesitation. He scribbled something on his notepad, tore off the slip, and handed it over. "Failure to maintain lane," he said. Maya accepted it, her eyes steady on his. "Is that all?" "That's all," he said, already turning away. She slid back into the driver's seat, folded the ticket, and set it neatly in the console. As she pulled away, the cruiser lights faded behind her, swallowed by distance and rain. But in her rearview mirror, his face lingered like a shadow. The road stretched ahead, empty once more. She didn't know yet that the next 3 weeks would pull her into a courtroom, into headlines, into a reckoning she never asked for. She only knew the silence of her own breathing and the faint red light on her phone, still recording. Back at the station, Kincaid tossed his paperwork into the tray, logged the citation, and leaned back in his chair with a lazy grin. Some soldier thought her ID meant something, he said to no one in particular. From the next desk, Officer Luis Ortega looked up. "Wait, Carter? You mean Lieutenant Colonel Carter? She came to the academy last year, ran logistics at Camp Resolute." Kincaid shrugged, opening a bag of chips. "Rate medium." "Don't care who she is. Out here, I'm the authority." Ortega didn't laugh. He just watched Kincaid for a moment, something uneasy flickering behind his eyes. Later, when the station emptied out, the body cam sat in its dock, quietly charging. No one reviewed it. Not that night, not the next. And somewhere, in a government database, Maya Carter didn't even realize she'd triggered. A copy of her video uploaded itself to secure storage. Time-stamped, geotagged, and undeniable. The night was over, but the story wasn't. The camera had seen everything, and soon, so would the world. The hum of the fluorescent lights inside Brooklyn Police Station was constant. A tired buzz that sounded like exhaustion had a frequency. Sergeant Brian Kincaid sat slouched at his desk, a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand, and the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he'd done his job. The night had ended like 1,000 others, paperwork, sarcasm, and the quiet belief that his authority went unquestioned. He didn't think twice about the woman from the highway. To him, she was another driver with too much confidence and not enough humility. He'd told the story twice already before the clock hit midnight. Once to Officer Luis Ortega, and once again to the overnight dispatcher who laughed a little too loud. Some soldier tried to pull rank on me, Kincaid said, tipping back his chair. Flashed her ID like it was a golden ticket. Ortega frowned. Wait, Carter? You mean Lieutenant Colonel Carter? Kincaid squinted. How the hell do you know that? She spoke at the academy last year. Logistics expert. 2 deployments, Bronze Star, real deal. Kincaid snorted, a sound that came more from his chest than his throat. Doesn't matter. Out there, the uniform doesn't mean jack. Badge beats stripes every time. Ortega didn't argue, but something about the conversation stuck with him. The way Kincaid said badge like it was a birthright instead of a responsibility. Down the hall, a printer spat out its last page of shift reports. The station had gone quiet. Kincaid logged his body cam footage into the system and tossed it into the charging dock without even checking the playback. The blue indicator light blinked once, like an eye opening and closing, then went still. Outside, the wind picked up. 2 hours away, Maya Carter sat in her living room, her laptop open, a single line blinking on the blank report she'd started to write. The cursor pulsed like a heartbeat. She could still hear his voice, sharp, dismissive, certain. You're refusing a lawful order. Doesn't make you above the law. Each sentence replayed, over and over, the way a soldier replays every detail after a mission gone wrong. But this hadn't been a mission. It had been something worse. Casual disrespect disguised as authority. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. Years of discipline told her to let it go, to move on, to focus on her duties. But another voice, quiet, deep, familiar, rose in her mind. Her late father's words from decades earlier. Silence helps the comfortable, not the righteous. She exhaled slowly, straightened her back, and began to type. Facts, times, license plate numbers, nothing emotional, just the truth, stripped down and documented. By the time the clock read 3:47 a.m., the report was done and filed to Internal Affairs, CC'd to the Office of the Inspector General and the Judge Advocate General's office. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't need to. The video was enough. When dawn broke, Brooklyn County woke like it always did. Slow, gray, unremarkable. But somewhere in that bureaucratic web of email chains and digital archives, her report landed in the inbox of Judge Naomi Whitaker's clerk. Ma'am, the young clerk said, standing at her office door, there's a new complaint that might hit your docket. Military plaintiff, alleging civil rights violations during a traffic stop. Whitaker looked up from her papers, the corners of her mouth tightening slightly. Military? Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Colonel Maya Carter. The judge leaned back in her chair, the morning light outlining the silver strands in her hair. Flag it for review, she said. She'd been a lawyer long before she wore robes, long before she'd become one of the few black female judges in the county. She knew what these cases looked like, the same script, different actors. But this one felt different already. Back at the station, the tone had shifted. Not loud, not obvious, but enough to feel. A couple of whispers in the hallway, a quick glance when Kincaid passed. Nobody said anything, but everyone had heard something. He noticed it most during roll call. When Chief Harold Redding walked in, the chatter stopped mid-sentence. Redding's face was unreadable as he called, Kincaid, my office. Kincaid followed, trying to read the tension in the air. The blinds were half closed, sunlight cutting across the desk like bars. Redding didn't waste time. Brian, he said, voice low, we have a problem. What kind of problem? The woman you pulled over last week, Lieutenant Colonel Carter, has filed a formal complaint, not just with Internal Affairs. The Office of the Inspector General's involved. Kincaid blinked, then smirked. Let her. She's not the first person who didn't like getting a ticket. Redding's tone didn't change. She's got video, 2 angles, yours and hers. That stopped him. So, Redding said, it shows a bad look. You were aggressive. You escalated. I followed procedure, Kincaid snapped. Reading leaned forward. You treated her like a suspect before you even knew who she was. Kincaid's jaw tightened. You gonna start believing every complaint now? I'm believing the footage, Reading said. And if this goes public, it's going to make the department look like a damn circus. For a moment, neither man spoke. The hum of the ceiling vent filled the silence. Finally, Redding sighed. You need to understand. She's not just some civilian with a smartphone. She's a decorated officer. She knows the system, and she's not backing down. Kincaid left the office with his pride intact, but his stomach churning. The badge on his chest felt heavier than usual. Not guilt, he wouldn't admit to that, but irritation. The idea that someone like her could challenge him made something in his gut twist. He told himself it was about control, about respect, about keeping order. But deep down, something small and inconvenient had begun to stir. A question he'd never asked himself before. What if I was wrong? That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch with a beer in hand, staring at the streetlights. The neighborhood was quiet. His phone buzzed once, a message from Ortega. Hey, Sarge, you might want to check your email. IA just requested your footage from Hillside. He didn't reply. He just stared at the message until the screen dimmed. Across town, Maya walked through the halls of Camp Resolute, her boots echoing off concrete floors. She passed soldiers who nodded respectfully, unaware that their commanding officer had spent part of her week reliving a moment of humiliation. She greeted them with the same calm she always did. But inside, she carried the weight of something larger than herself. Her aide, Sergeant Darnell Brooks, caught up to her outside the operations office. Ma'am, he said quietly, you sure about all this? Going up against local law enforcement, it could get messy. Maya stopped, her expression steady. Accountability doesn't scare me, Sergeant. Silence does. Brooks nodded, looking down at the floor. Understood, ma'am. By noon, the story had begun to move quietly through circles that didn't usually intersect. The military chain of command, the state's internal affairs division, and a small newsroom where Ella Mendez, a reporter at the Brooklyn Post, read a single-line email from an anonymous source. You might want to look into a traffic stop involving a female officer named Carter. There's footage. Mendez leaned back in her chair, heart quickening. Brooklyn PD and a lieutenant colonel, she whispered. That's a story. And while she drafted her first notes, Kincaid sat in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the metal door. The whispers had grown louder now, just enough to feel like static in his ears. He tried to drown it out, convincing himself the system would protect him like it always had. He'd seen it before. Complaints came and went. The union stepped in. Paperwork disappeared. Time dulled outrage. But this time, something was different. The usual silence around him felt thinner, more fragile. In another part of town, Judge Whitaker sat alone in her chambers after hours, reviewing the docket. She paused when she reached the name Carter V. Kincaid. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered to herself, I've seen this play before. Outside, the courthouse lights flickered against the night sky. Kincaid didn't know it yet, but the next envelope that landed on his desk would not be another traffic report or shift memo. It would be a notice to appear, a summons that would drag him from his comfort into the one place where his badge carried no weight. He laughed when he first saw it, a short, humorless sound. No way this sticks. By morning, the sky over Brookland was the color of dishwater. Thin light, no promise in it. The town came awake the way it always did. Trucks coughing down residential streets, a bus wheezing at the corner by the laundromat, a diner sign flickering open as if it needed convincing. Inside the station, a receptionist poured coffee that tasted like it had a grudge. The day would pretend to be ordinary for as long as it could. It didn't last long. The first email landed in Internal Affairs at 7:11 a.m., flagged priority by a DOD liaison and CC'd to the county's legal counsel. The subject line was dry enough to pass unnoticed. Traffic stop, civil rights concern, supporting video. The attachments were not. 2 files, one from a phone, one from a body cam, time-stamped within a minute of each other on Hillside Parkway. A quiet doorway into a loud problem. By 7:32, Captain Harold Reading was standing in the IA office with his jacket half on, half off, reading the summary twice. He pinched the bridge of his nose and said the words every commander says when they're about to be unpopular: pull everything. The IA investigator, Marcy Lowen, nodded and started a list. Kincaid's prior stops for the last 90 days, complaint history for 5 years, training refreshers attended or skipped, union grievances, commendations, the whole biography of a badge. While the queries ran, Redding walked the hallway that smelled like dust and industrial cleaner, practicing sentences he would have to say out loud in 5 minutes. He didn't enjoy confrontation. He enjoyed the absence of lawsuits. But the thing about absence is it never lasts. He found Sergeant Brian Kincaid in the locker room, lacing his boots with the brisk precision of a man rehearsing control. "We need to talk," Reading said. "We already did." Kincaid didn't look up. "Rate medium." "Now we do it with a paper trail. Internal Affairs has the footage." Kincaid paused, then tugged his laces tighter than they needed to be. "So they can watch me do my job?" "They can watch you escalate a stop that didn't need escalating," Reading said evenly. "We'll handle the review by the book. You'll cooperate by the book." Kincaid let the silence linger. Then he stood. "I followed procedure." "Then procedure's about to have a long day," Reading said, and left before his face said more than his words. Across town, Lieutenant Colonel Maya Carter's office held the clean geometry of a life sharpened by service. Neat stacks, labels that made sense, a map of supply routes pinned with color-coded tabs. She had slept 3 hours, woke once to the phantom taste of adrenaline, and finally sat up when the bass bugle played Reveille, as if discipline could drown out memory. It didn't. She could still see the flashlight catching dust in the air, making it look like it was snowing in place. Her aide, Sergeant Darnell Brooks, knocked lightly and leaned in. He kept his voice soft, a courtesy in uniform that often means I see you fighting your own head. "Ma'am, your 0800 was moved to 0830. You've got a call with legal at 9. "Thank you," she said, and let the words land like anchors. She did not perform strength. She wore it the way some people wear quiet. At 8:57, her laptop chimed and the rectangle of Asha Patel appeared, hair pulled back, glasses reflecting whatever battle she'd already been in this morning. Civil rights attorneys rarely had easy mornings. "Lieutenant Colonel," Asha said, crisp but warm, "I've watched both videos twice. They align. We'll file today." Maya nodded once, as if to herself. "I don't want to circus." "You won't get a circus," Asha said. "A circus comes with clowns. We're filing a complaint." Maya's mouth twitched. It was as close as she came to a smile right now. "I'm not interested in press," she added. "Good," Asha said. "Press comes later if the system stalls." She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "I need to ask this bluntly. Are you ready for the noise anyway? Because even quiet cases get loud in all the wrong places." "I'm ready for the record," Maya said. "Everything else is weather." "Then we file," Asha replied, and the call ended with the kind of certainty that leaves no echo. The complaint hit the Lucas Brooklyn Civil Division docket a little after 10, a stack of pages with no theatrics and a lot of spine. Within an hour, an auto-generated notice populated a calendar. Carter vs. Kincaid. It looked like any other line of text until you read it with blood in your ears. Down the block from the courthouse, The Brooklyn Post hummed with the kind of energy that lives somewhere between curiosity and caffeine. Ella Mendez had already heard the rumor, military officer files complaint against local cop, and she had already done the thing good reporters do when rumors arrive. Nothing until she could verify something. She called a source in IA who didn't speak but failed to hang up fast enough. Silence is its own admission if you know how to listen. Ella opened a draft. When the badge meets the uniform. She typed 3 lines, then deleted all 3. Too early. She needed the complaint, she needed the video, she needed more than a hunch and an anonymous tip. You only get to be right in public if you start by being patient in private. Back at the station, IA's printer churned out a stack an inch thick. Prior use of force reviews, training logs, 2 commendation letters that praised Kincaid's decisive presence, and 10 complaints that had grown dust skins and Union signatures. On paper, he was the kind of officer older sergeants call solid and younger ones call don't mess with him. On paper, the past always reads cleaner than it felt. Marcy Lowen slid the body cam footage onto her screen and watched it all. The flashlight angle, the holster hand, the tone you don't need subtitles for. She watched it again with the sound off. The images still said what they needed to say. She walked the footage down to Redding's office and put the USB on his desk like it weighed something. "Is there any version of this where he comes out looking good?" Reading asked without looking away from the wall. "No," she said. He didn't sigh. He just nodded once, a tiny funeral for plausible deniability. "All right." By early afternoon, the station ran on rumor. That's how departments metabolize fear, gossip first, then policy. 2 rookies traded half sentences in the break room, pretending they were talking about football. A corporal took the long way around the bullpen to avoid making eye contact with Kincaid. The Union rep, Tommy Harkins, appeared in the hallway like a magician called by subpoenas. "Brian," Harkins said, clapping him on the shoulder with a familiarity that felt like a contract. "I'm looped. I'll be at IA with you. We'll keep this narrow. Timeline, language. You know the dance." "It's nothing," Kincaid said, voice knife flat. "Everything's nothing until it isn't," Harkins replied, and that was the most honest sentence he'd say all day. Kincaid found Officer Ortega by the side entrance, pretending to study the hinge on the door. "You talk to anyone?" Kincaid asked. "About what?" Ortega said, too fast. "You know about what." "I watched my screen and did my job," Ortega said, "like always." "Good," Kincaid said, and tried to make it sound like brotherhood instead of warning. The envelope arrived just before 3. It was thin and beige and official in the way fires are official. Kincaid opened it at his desk and read the first line, then the second, then the third, slower. He read his own name like it belonged to somebody else. "Notice to appear," he said quietly, as if reading it out loud might turn it into somebody else's problem. In her chambers, Judge Naomi Whitaker set a ceramic mug on a coaster shaped like Pennsylvania and lifted the notice from her clerk's hand. She scanned the caption, Carter v. Kincaid, and felt an old muscle memory stir, the one that remembers law bar prep weeks and arguments made in rooms that smelled like varnish and bad cologne. "Assign council notifications," she said. "Schedule a status conference and tell it that I want the video on a secure local drive. No streaming in my courtroom. We're not buffering justice." "Yes, Judge," the clerk said, smiling despite herself. Whitaker read the complaint in full. She did not rush. She did not highlight. When she finished, she tapped the page with one finger, a habit from years of convincing herself decisions were instruments, not weapons. She glanced at the photo on her shelf, her grandmother in a Sunday hat on a hot day in Birmingham, a half smile that held centuries, and whispered, "We'll do this clean." Late afternoon folded into that tired gold that makes everything look like a memory. Asha Patel called Maya with the update. We're on the phone. Docket, Asha said. They'll try to narrow this to a single stop. We're opening it wider, to pattern and practice. IA just pulled his prior complaints. If they've been closed for bad reasons, we challenge the reasons. I don't want a witch hunt, Maya said. Witches aren't real, Asha replied. Culture is. Maya was quiet. She had never loved the sound of her own name on legal paperwork. It felt like stepping into a room where the floor decides whether you're standing. Will I have to testify? She asked. Yes, Asha said, and softened her tone. And you'll be excellent at it. You live in truth like it's a house with good bones. Okay, Maya said, barely louder than breath. Also, press will sniff this out. If they call, refer them to me, and I'll say no comment until no comment becomes unhelpful. Thank you, Maya said, for the house with good bones. Asha laughed. Steal it if you want. As evening stretched, Ella Mendez parked outside the courthouse and watched people exit, a trickle of suits, a pair of public defenders laughing the way only exhausted people laugh, a court officer rubbing his temples. She didn't need to be here, she needed sources. But sometimes you sit where stories pass, just to catch their shadows. Her phone buzzed. You didn't get this from me, the text read. A case number followed. She closed her eyes, thanked whatever universe handles favors, and opened the public terminal inside. 2 minutes later, she had a printout with the name she needed to put in her editor's ear. She did not have the video yet. But stories are scaffolds. You don't hang a roof on nothing. Back in the station's IA office, the union rep ran interference while Marcy walked Kincaid through the video like a tour guide with a tourist who hates art. Is that your voice? She asked. Yes. Is that your hand near your holster? Yes. Is there a safety concern? He hesitated. The pause was a kind of admission, even if he didn't intend it. No, he said finally. Did she disobey your orders? She questioned me. Is that disobedience? Harkins interjected. We're not adjudicating legal standards in an administrative interview. You're right, Marcy said levelly. We're building a record. Kincaid felt the room tilt an inch. He wanted to snap. He wanted to say the thing you can't put back in your throat once you let it out. He didn't. He swallowed it and tasted metal. When he got home, the house felt too quiet. The TV remote lay on the coffee table like an excuse. He turned on a game he didn't care about and listened to the announcer fill air with statistics that sounded like certainty. He would have preferred anger. Anger is a plan. This felt like waiting. Across the river, Maya jogged the bass track at a pace that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with remembering she had a body, not just a story. The sky had finally decided on a color. A private on his first week, freckles and nerves, lapped her and nodded, startled to meet the lieutenant colonel out here with everyone else. She nodded back and kept moving. She stopped when her phone buzzed. Asha again. Status conference set, 3 weeks, Judge Whitaker presiding. Maya typed it, thank you. Asha replied with something she rarely texted. Proud of you. Maya stared at the words until the screen went dark. Pride felt like a thing that belonged to other days. Tonight she had something smaller and somehow larger, steadiness. The kind that lets you walk into a room that wasn't built for you and leave it rearranged. In her chambers, Whitaker finished drafting a short order about evidentiary handling and closed the file. She didn't say goodnight to the empty room, though it felt like it needed one. She lifted her mug, now cold, and looked out across the square where the courthouse steps widened into darkness. She'd stood on those steps as a new lawyer once, young enough to call hope by its first name. She still did. She had just learned to pronounce it in court. The night returned to its steady hum. Streetlights tick-tick-ticked. Somewhere a train's horn threaded through the dark like a needle. The case existed now, not as rumor or pain or a video stuck in a dock, but as a line in a ledger the law would have to read out loud. And because the world never likes to be told what it is, it tried to be normal again. The diner refilled coffee, a teenager practiced a jump shot in a driveway with a cracked free throw line, someone argued softly on a porch because the house was too small for loudness. All of it, the ordinary life that justice is supposed to protect, kept going. At 11:06 p.m., Kincaid stood on his porch with a beer warming in his hand and admitted something to the quiet. This might be the one that sticks. He didn't notice the neighbor's blinds shift. He didn't see Ortega drive by and keep going like it was a coincidence. He didn't know that Ella had the docket number and would spend the night calling people who hang their ethics on the hook of, "I'll talk if you don't use my name." 3 weeks is both a lifetime and a blink. It would pass like any other stretch of days. Work, meals, the recycling bin, a calendar that never tells you which date is going to break you open. But 3 weeks from now, a courtroom would fill with uniforms and civilians and the soft scrape of chairs, and the judge would lift her eyes to the room and call names in a voice that made even stubborn men sit up straighter. For now, everything was motion pretending to be stillness. The complaint had been filed, the clock had started, and the story had stopped living only in a phone. Somewhere in the county data center, 2 files sat side by side on a secure drive, one recorded by a woman who knew how fast things can go wrong, the other by a department that had forgotten how wrong can sound. Side by side, they waited for the only thing that gives images meaning, a room that's listening. Maya set her alarm, placed her phone face down, and let the room go dark. She did not pray for victory. She prayed for clarity, which is what people who've seen enough of the world ask for when they're done being surprised by it. Kincaid lay awake and tried not to run the tape in his head. He failed, and in the failure he found the sentence that would follow him into court whether he spoke it or not. I didn't like her tone. Judge Whitaker turned off her lamp and let the courthouse settle into its old bones. She had a memo to finish tomorrow, a meeting with the oversight board next week, and a memory she carried like a coin in her pocket. The sight of a young public defender years ago standing in front of a judge who wouldn't meet her eyes. She had promised herself back then that if she ever wore the robe, nobody would have to raise their voice to be heard. The town slept. The case did not. And because stories rarely announce their turning points, the next morning would arrive with the same pale light, and people would drive past Hillside Parkway, and nobody would know that a citation written under a tired street lamp had become a lever big enough to move a room where truth would be measured and weighed and written down. The morning the courthouse took their names into its mouth, the air felt sharper than it had any right to be. The flag on the lawn barely moved. A janitor hosed yesterday off the stone steps, sweeping cigarette filters and a stray coffee lid toward the gutter. By 8:30, people started to gather. Not a crowd, not yet, just the quiet river that forms when a story is about to earn its ears. Inside, the building smelled like old paper and polished wood. The fluorescent lights hummed like they always did, pretending to be daylight. Courtroom 2B had that particular hush you only hear in rooms built for judgment. Soft leather, quiet shoes, a clock that seemed louder than it was. A bailiff stood near the door, talking low to a court officer about the game last night. Every voice sounded like it had to ask permission to exist here. Maya Carter sat at counsel table with Asha Patel, palms flat on the folder they'd rearranged a dozen times. She wore her service uniform, not for theater, but for truth. The ribbons on her chest were not decoration. They were a condensed biography. Losses, miles, choices. Her posture held the steadiness she had practiced on weather-beaten tarmacs and in windowless command rooms where bad news arrived without knocking. At the other table, Sergeant Brian Kincaid adjusted his tie like it was misbehaving. His face rested in the flat line he used when he wanted to look unbothered. He scanned the benches and found familiar shapes. 2 patrol guys from West Precinct, the Union rep, Tommy Harkins, and a corporal who nodded like a promise. Then he saw Officer Ortega slip into the last row and sit on the end, far enough to feel safe, close enough to notice everything. The judge's door opened, and Judge Naomi Whitaker took the bench. The room rose as one. She had a presence that didn't require volume. Her black robe fell straight, her expression clean. She looked out over the faces like a teacher who refused to be surprised by a classroom. "Good morning," she said. "We are here on Carter versus Kincaid. This is a civil matter. We will treat it with the seriousness the Constitution requires. Counsel, are we ready?" Asha stood. "Ready for the plaintiff, Your Honor." The defense attorney, a county regular with a habit of making everything sound negotiable, rose too. "Ready for the defense." The judge nodded. "Then let's proceed." Asha began the opening like she was placing stones across a creek, measured, sure. "This case is about the difference between authority and discipline," she said. "It's about how power behaves when it thinks nobody's watching, and how power changes when it learns it's being seen." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She laid out the path, the stop on Hillside Parkway, the tone, the escalation, the video. She used the jury's eyes more than their ears. "We are not asking you for outrage," she finished. "We are asking you for record." The defense tried a different weather system, procedure, training, officer safety. He said protocol the way some men say alibi. "You will hear that Sergeant Kincaid followed his training in a high-risk context," he pressed. "You will hear that uncertainty can look like danger. Our job isn't to punish caution, it's to protect it." Judge Whitaker thanked them both and turned to the plaintiff's table. "Ms. Patel, call your first witness." Asha stood. "Lieutenant Colonel Maya Carter." As Maya approached the stand, the air in the room did a small thing. Tightened, focused, like the lens had been twisted until the blur snapped into place. She took the oath, said, "I do," with steady emphasis, and sat, folding her hands like she was holding something secret and fragile. She looked at the jury and saw a teachable room. 2 women who had taken notes from the first minute, a man who wasn't convinced yet and wanted to be, a retiree with kindness in his forehead. "Lieutenant Colonel," Asha began, "please state your name and your current role for the record." "Maya Elise Carter," she said. "Lieutenant Colonel, United States Army. Logistics, 22 years in service." "Were you driving a government-issued vehicle on the night in question?" "Yes." "Were you under the influence of any substance?" "No." "Were you compliant with the officer's requests?" "Yes, my questions were for clarification." "Did you record the stop?" "I did." "Why?" Maya's voice warmed slightly, not with anger but with memory. "Because I've lived long enough to know that silence isn't protection. I recorded it to have an accurate record of what happened." Asha nodded. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, the plaintiff moves to admit Plaintiff's Exhibit 1, the cell phone video, and Exhibit 2, the officer's body camera footage." The judge glanced at the defense. "Any objection to foundation?" "None, Your Honor," the defense said, a little too quickly. "Admitted," Judge Whitaker said. "Play them." The clerk dimmed the house lights 1 notch. On the monitor, a familiar world bloomed. Dash glare, the laser bright white of a flashlight, the grain of asphalt like unbothered sand. The room watched Maya's own hand, steady as she lifted the phone, listened to her voice ask for a reason, heard Kincaid's answer cut like a strip of tin. The camera saw the hand near his holster, the way he tilted his chin like the badge was heavier than his neck. It saw her walk the line under the street lamp, the kind of straight any framing carpenter would be proud of. It saw him write the citation anyway. Then the body cam, same time, different eyes. The frame jerked with each step. The audio caught the breath between words. You could hear the grit under their shoes. When the footage ended, no one moved for a count of 3, like the room was waiting to see if reality had anything else to add. Judge Whitaker looked at the jurors quietly, then back to counsel. Proceed. Asha's questions were wire cutters, precise, intended to free rather than wound. Lieutenant Colonel, at any point did you disobey a lawful command? No. Did you raise your voice? No. Did you threaten the officer? No. Were you given a reason for the escalation to a field sobriety test? No. What did the officer say when you asked for clarification? That I was refusing a lawful order. And were you? No. Asha stepped back. No further questions. Defense stood, buttoning his jacket like he was sealing himself in. He smiled the polite smile men practice when they want your cooperation more than your respect. Lieutenant Colonel, you understand that traffic stops can be unpredictable. Yes. You understand officers are trained to err on the side of caution. I understand they're trained to use judgment. And judgment sometimes means asking a driver to exit the vehicle. When there's a reason, she said gently. Not when there isn't. He nodded like he'd expected that. Is it possible that Sergeant Kincaid perceived danger you didn't? Maya's eyes didn't blink. I was seated, hands visible, responsive, sober, and compliant. The only danger in that moment came from escalation. You recorded the stop. Do you distrust the police? I distrust situations where discipline is missing. He tilted his head, searching for the next angle. You'd agree tone can be hard to interpret on video. I'd agree tone is easy to hear in person. He let that sit a beat too long. No further questions, he said, voice smaller. Judge Whitaker turned to the defense table. Call your witness. Sergeant Kincaid, the defense said, and the room did that tiny shift again, the way people lean without meaning to. Kincaid took the stand with a gait that had been steady since academy days. He took the oath with a voice that wanted to sound steady too. Up close, the tightness in his jaw looked like it hurt. Sergeant, how long have you served this county? 15 years. What's your record like? Good, solid. He glanced at the jurors. I show up, I back up my people. I don't turn when things get loud. Walk us through your mindset that night. Kincaid shaped the air with his hands like he could sculpt a better memory. It was late, low traffic. The vehicle looked unfamiliar. I saw what I thought was a drift. In my experience, that can be a sign. Fatigue, impairment, texting. I initiated a stop. And when you approached? She questioned me a lot. It put me on alert. Did you fear for your safety? He hesitated, the kind of pause that puts its own shape on the room. I was cautious. Is that why you asked her to exit the vehicle? Yes. Why write the citation after she passed the test? I observed a lane violation. Were you aware she was a lieutenant colonel? Not at the time. And if you had known? Kincaid's voice sank half an octave. I probably would have handled it differently. The sentence landed with the weight of something that had just become evidence. The defense flinched, recovered, tried to soften the bruise. Different how? I might have, I don't know, taken more time. No further questions. Asha walked up slowly, hands free, like she had nothing to prove. Sergeant, is questioning a police officer illegal? No. Is asking for a reason illegal? No. Is maintaining a calm tone illegal? No. Then when you testified that her questions put you on alert, what did you mean? He shifted. She didn't sound... He stopped. Didn't sound... what? Respectful. Asha nodded as if he'd said the very thing she asked for. Respect is a feeling, Sergeant. Law is a standard. What lawful standard did she violate? Silence flexed between them. None, he said finally. Did you place your hand near your holster while she was seated with her hands visible? Yes. Why? Habit, he said, and hated how it sounded. Were you in danger? No, Asha let a breath out. One last question. If you had known she was a lieutenant colonel, you testified you would have handled it differently. Why would her rank matter if the law is the same for everyone? He didn't answer. The question reached past words and touched whatever was left of his certainty. No further questions, Asha said, and returned to her table like she'd just set down a weight she didn't want to carry any longer than necessary. Judge Whittaker looked down at her notes, then back up at the room. Members of the jury, you will hear closing arguments tomorrow. For today, we will recess. She rapped the gavel once, sound neat and final. Nobody stood for a second. It was as if the room needed permission to breathe. When the benches finally moved, the sounds came back in pieces. The scrape of a shoe, a cough, the whisper of fabric under a winter coat. Kincaid stepped down and didn't look at anyone. Ortega stayed seated until the aisle cleared, face unreadable, then slipped out into the hallway where the echo made every footstep sound like two. Maya remained at the table longer than she needed to. She wasn't avoiding standing. She was measuring stillness. Asha touched her sleeve. You did exactly what we came to do. I just told the truth, Maya whispered. Some rooms make that sound bigger, Asha said. They stepped into the corridor and found a thin slice of daylight at the end where the glass doors breathed in and out with the traffic of the building. A few uniforms from Camp Resolute waited there, quiet, respectful, in business attire because this wasn't a formation, this was a witness. They didn't crowd her, they just existed near her like ballast. Down the hall, the judge walked back toward chambers, her clerk trailing with a stack that looked heavier than it was. Whittaker paused beside the bulletin board where the day's docket was clipped under a plastic sleeve. Someone had underlined Carter V. Kincaid in pencil. She could hear her grandmother's voice again. Hold your chin up, baby, but use your eyes. She looked up and caught Maya's gaze across the distance. A small nod passed between them, professional, human both. Outside, the sky had softened to winter blue. Ella Mendez leaned against the courthouse railing, a notebook in her coat pocket, a promise to her editor in her head. She had no video yet, only phrases and posture, and that one sentence that was going to be in her lead, whether she liked it or not. I probably would have handled it differently. She didn't shout questions. She didn't need to. She let the moment breathe and wrote the date on the top corner of a clean page. In the parking lot, Kincaid unlocked his sedan and missed the keyhole twice before the fob finally cooperated. He sat behind the wheel, hands not quite touching the circle, listening to the in-car silence that used to feel like respite and now sounded like consequence. He thought about every time he'd said, "My streets, my rules." He thought about how rules change when other people are invited to read them. He started the engine, then turned it off again. He watched his own breath fog the inside of the windshield and cleared it with the back of his hand. When he finally drove away, he didn't turn on the radio. He didn't want anyone else's voice in his head. Maya reached the bottom of the courthouse steps and paused. The breeze lifted a corner of paper posted to the bulletin board. Some notice about parking enforcement that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with order. She inhaled, slow and deliberate, the way you do before lifting something you can't afford to drop. Asha touched her elbow. Rate medium. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, Maya echoed, as if saying it could bend time into something more manageable. Judge Whittaker closed her chamber's door and stood for a moment with her palm still against the wood. She had a short memo to finish for the oversight board, and she would write it with a pen that glided the way good arguments do. She sat, pulled the legal pad closer, and wrote the sentence she'd carried from the bench. Discretion must be paired with discipline. She underlined it once, not for emphasis, but for aim. The building emptied one corridor at a time. The flag out front gave up and went still. Across town, a diner poured evening coffee for people who hadn't learned yet that caffeine was just a different name for hope. On Hillside Parkway, the streetlight buzzed like a stubborn bee. A car passed, then another, then none. And somewhere in the hard drive of a court server humming behind a locked door, two files rested side by side, the phone's steady eye and the body cam's unblinking witness. Tomorrow they'd be played again, and the jury would be asked to decide whether what everyone had seen already had a name the law could hold. The night put its arm around the town like it always did. The day had not ended anything. It had only made things visible. Tomorrow would ask the room to speak. Tonight the room remembered how to listen. Morning broke without color. A pale wash over the courthouse square that made everything look like it had been erased and redrawn. The flag hung limp. A city crew scraped gum from the sidewalk in small, stubborn circles. Inside, the building warmed itself up, radiators ticking, elevators yawning awake, a custodian humming a hymn as if the walls might need courage. It wasn't a day for spectacle. It was a day for sentences. They started with closings. No speeches, no fireworks. Just the last chance each side had to gather the fragments into a shape a jury could carry back into a room and weigh. Asha Patel went first. She didn't stride or point or even pace. She walked to the center of the carpet and let the jurors see her hands, open, still. "This case," she said, "asks you to look at what power does when it thinks it's alone. You saw what happened. You heard it. You felt the silence in the space where discipline should have been." She didn't say racism the way some lawyers say a charge. She said it the way a doctor says a diagnosis, unafraid of the word. "We aren't here to make an example of anyone. We are here to keep a record so the next person who sits where Lieutenant Colonel Carter sat doesn't have to prove they're human before they're treated like one." She let the line rest. She didn't push. Authority without accountability is a mask for weakness. Our law doesn't wear masks. It looks people in the eye. The defense followed. He chose the weather of reason, policy, training, caution. You're being asked to second-guess a split-second judgment on a dark road. Traffic stops are dangerous. Officers die. Training isn't pretty, it's practical. He gestured carefully, a palm upturned toward Kincaid, as if asking the room to forgive fallibility. Don't criminalize caution. Don't punish a man for wanting to go home alive. Nobody moved. The jurors looked at their laps, their notes, one another. The clock did what clocks do in rooms like this. It sounded like it was deciding the case. Judge Naomi Whitaker thanked them, as she had been taught to do by a mentor who insisted manners are not optional in rooms with this much power. Members of the jury, you will receive instructions. You will deliberate. You will return a verdict when you have one. This court is in recess until that time. They filed out. The door shut. The room exhaled. Waiting isn't drama to watch, but it is drama to live. It stretched across noon and into afternoon. That terrible elastic hour where every footstep in the hall could be the one that ends the day. Maya Carter and Asha sat side by side at the counsel table. They didn't whisper. They didn't scroll. Maya's hands were still, fingers resting lightly on the edge of the folder like a pianist before a first note. Her mind wandered to the bass track, to a young private's freckles, to a convoy crawling through dust years ago when the only music was diesel and breathing. She wasn't reliving the stop on Hillside. She had already put that on tape so she wouldn't have to carry it. She was practicing steadiness for the last time. Across the aisle, Sergeant Brian Kincaid rolled his shoulders like a boxer between rounds. The union rep had gone downstairs to forage bad coffee and a worse donut. Kincaid stared at the seal on the wall, an eagle, a ring of stars, and tried to let it mean something comforting. It didn't. It felt like a test he hadn't studied for because he didn't think the teacher would ever call on him. In the hall, Officer Luis Ortega sat on a bench with his elbows on his knees, looking at his laces like they might confess something. He thought about the academy speech Carter gave the year before, how she told a room of rookies that respect is earned in small decisions nobody claps for. He'd written that down. He still had the note in his locker, torn at the corner where a piece of tape had taken some of the paper with it. He had never thought he'd watch that sentence collide with his own house. Down the block, Ella Mendez ate a granola bar like it was a negotiation. She didn't want to file a story on jury deliberates. Nobody remembers those. She needed the verdict. She needed the sentence the city would remember whether it wanted to or not. She paced past the vending machines. She checked the clock. She clicked her pen until a security guard smiled at her in that "don't make me tell you twice" way, and she stuck it back in her pocket like a kid caught with gum in class. The day wore thin. Shadows from the high windows shifted across the pews like slow water. The bailiff opened the door once with a hopeful look that died immediately. And then, at 3:41, the light changed. The clerk's phone buzzed. Somewhere a printer coughed. The courtroom doors breathed open and a voice said, "We have a verdict." People moved without standing. The sound was a low tide. Chairs, steps, cloth. Asha touched Maya's forearm just once. Across the aisle, Kincaid swallowed like his throat had forgotten how. The jury filed in, 12 ordinary faces made suddenly mythic by the weight they carried. Judge Whitaker took the bench, and the room rose, and when it sat again you could hear the leather sigh. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman with a gray streak in her hair stood, paper in hand, voice steady. "We have, Your Honor." "Please read your verdict." In the matter of Carter versus Kincaid, on the claim of violation of constitutional rights during an unlawful stop and detainment, we find in favor of the plaintiff. It landed without applause. It landed like a weight finding its shelf. Ella wrote the sentence down so fast her pen left a small tear in the page. Judge Whitaker nodded once, not triumphant, simply precise. "Members of the jury, this court thanks you for your service." She turned to the clerk. "Please record the verdict." The foreperson continued, reading the part that becomes math. "Damages in the amount of $35,000. Kincaid's jaw moved as if chewing an old argument. Asha exhaled, not a victory sigh, more like a valve releasing pressure that had been building in a quiet room for 3 weeks. Maya didn't move. Stillness was a language she spoke fluently. Judge Whitaker looked down at her notes and then up again, voice clear and even. "Further, given the evidence presented, the court will forward this decision to the Department of Justice for policy review and to the Brooklyn Police Department for internal review and evaluation." She didn't emphasize any word. She didn't have to. The sentence carried its own torque. Silence again. The kind that isn't empty. The kind that is full of the thing that just happened. The judge dismissed the jury, and they left in a line that had meaning now. People rose slowly, unsure how to carry their faces. In the back row, Ortega stayed seated until his legs knew which direction to go. He didn't look at Kincaid when he passed. He looked at the door like an answer. At counsel table, Asha squeezed Maya's hand. "You did it," she said softly. "We did what the record asked us to," Maya replied. It wasn't humility, it was accuracy. Kincaid stood, then sat again, then stood for real. He gathered papers that meant nothing anymore and slid them into a folder. The union rep rested a hand on his shoulder and said, "We'll appeal, the way people say, there's always next season, when they don't believe it, but can't stand the sound of finality." In the hallway, the air felt different, as if somebody had opened a window a crack and the building remembered what outside smelled like. A few soldiers from Camp Resolute waited near the far exit in suits that didn't quite fit their shoulders. They didn't cheer, they didn't speak. They simply made space. The way you do when you escort a person who just walked a long way without taking a step. Judge Whitaker stepped out from chambers to cross to the clerk's office. She saw Maya and Asha by the door, paused, and approached with the same steady gravity she wore on the bench. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, "thank you for your service." "Thank you for yours, Your Honor," Maya answered. It could have been a cliché in another mouth. In hers, it was an exchange of burdens. The judge's eyes softened around the edges. "You held your ground without raising your voice," she said. "That matters." "So did your room," Maya replied. "It listened." Whitaker nodded once. A private acknowledgement between women who had learned to be steel without turning to stone. Then she moved on, and the corridor swallowed her robe like a curtain closing. Outside, the press had gathered, not a swarm, but enough. Microphones waited like open mouths. Cameras blinked. Ella Mendez didn't shout a question. She approached with her notebook at her side and asked quietly, "Lieutenant Colonel Carter, any comment?" Maya looked at the faces, young, old, tired, awake. She could feel the pressure to give them a sentence they could underline. She gave them the only one she had. "We asked for the record," she said. "The court kept it." "Do you think this changes anything?" A TV reporter called from the curb. Maya glanced at the courthouse doors and then at the street beyond. "Change is a series of small decisions made in rooms like this," she said. "We made one today." She didn't stay for follow-ups. She didn't turn it into a stage. She stepped down and walked into the winter light like a person who still had work to do. At the bottom of the steps, her phone buzzed. A text from Asha. "Payment aside, we'll file the forwarding notifications. DOJ review. Internal PD eval. Expect noise." Maya typed, "Let the noise be useful." Asha answered with a single check mark, the modern hieroglyph for heard. Across the plaza, Kincaid stood near the parking lot, his folder held against his chest like a shield that had learned it was paper. He had wanted to be angry. Anger is a clean fuel. But he felt something messier, like the floor of a garage after a storm. Oil, grit, a little water, lines that used to be straight. A reporter approached, and he lifted the folder higher, covering his face. "No comment," he said, and his voice sounded like it had been left in the sun too long. He got into his car and didn't start it right away. He looked at his hands on the wheel and thought about every time they'd knocked on a window, every time they'd tightened a cuff, every time they'd hovered near a holster because habit dressed up as prudence. He thought about the sentence that had left his mouth and wouldn't come back. "I probably would have handled it differently." He hated how true it was. He hated that it was the truest thing he'd said all week. When he finally drove off, he didn't look in the rear view. He didn't want to see the building get smaller. He didn't want to watch anything recede. The afternoon thinned itself into evening. At Camp Resolute, the flag came down in ceremony, hands steady, corners crisp. In the judge's chambers, a memo took shape, bulleted recommendations for bias training, transparency in body cam audits, an emphasis on discretion paired with discipline. She underlined the phrase. She'd write it once here and then again in a larger report for the oversight board next week. Paper could carry a thing farther than a voice could. Ella sent her story at 5:12. Her editor cut 2 paragraphs and moved her quote to the second line. "We asked for the record," Carter said. "The court kept it." Ella didn't argue. It was the right choice. She closed her laptop and sat with the quiet for a moment, feeling the city shift a degree on its axis. On a porch in a neighborhood where dogs barked at everything like it all needed permission, Ortega sat with a beer going flat and the note from the Academy speech in his pocket. He unfolded it and read the line out loud because it was late and nobody cared. Respect is earned in small decisions nobody claps for. He tucked it back away and looked at the sky like it might answer him. It didn't. That wasn't its job. Maya drove past the courthouse one last time, not because she needed to, but because the road back to the base bent that way. The building glowed the way brick glows when it remembers it's been here longer than you. Her phone lit with a message from Brooks. "Proud of you, ma'am." Another from a number she didn't recognize. My daughter was watching the news. She said, "Mom, she's brave." Thank you. She didn't respond to either. Some messages are not to be answered. They are to be kept. She turned onto the highway and the car settled into its lane like it trusted the line. Traffic was thin. The rhythm of tires on seams made its small music. Somewhere out there, Hillside Parkway stretched under the same lights, buzzing the same tired buzz. A different cruiser would park at the gas station tonight. Different people would drive by in cars that need new wipers and lives that need a break. Most nights, nothing happens. Most nights aren't history. But history doesn't ask permission. It just shows up and waits to see who's ready. At home, Maya folded her uniform with the same care she had the first day she wore it. She set the ribbons down like they were fragile, because in a way they were, stories pressed into color. She sat on the edge of her bed and let her shoulders drop in a way she hadn't let them all week. It wasn't relief, it was release. The difference is the direction the air moves. Her phone buzzed one more time. Asha again. Tomorrow we talk next steps. Policy forwarding. IA timelines. Press will. Call. Maya typed, tomorrow. She turned the phone face down and the room went quiet enough for sleep to find it. In her own house, Judge Whitaker washed a coffee cup and set it upside down to dry. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the street where a boy on a scooter wobbled and then didn't fall. She smiled a little. She had to leave the robe at work. That was a rule she wrote for herself a long time ago. But the work never left her. It shouldn't. She turned off the light and the glass became a mirror. She saw a black woman whose grandmother had taught her to speak softly and carry information. She nodded once at her reflection and went to bed. The courthouse sat back into its dark like a ship docking. The server room hummed, and somewhere in its memory a file was stamped with a new status. Admitted, read, decided. The city didn't cheer, it breathed. That's what living things do when a weight shifts. Tomorrow would belong to forms, appeals, notices, the choreography of bureaucracy. Tonight belonged to the sentence the room learned to say out loud. What happened had a name, and the law could hold it. And while most of Brooklyn turned out their lamps and went back to ordinary life, because ordinary is always the point, one road kept its promise to be nothing but a way forward. Hillside Parkway held its line. Cars moved. The night did what it always does. It told the truth by refusing to become anything else. The day after the verdict didn't look like history. It looked like a Thursday trying its best. Clouds stacked low over Brooklyn, buses sighing, the diner's neon open buzzing with the same tired optimism. If you didn't know what had happened, you wouldn't feel it in the air. But people who lived in rooms where consequence is counted could tell the atmosphere had shifted half an inch, the way a house settles and everyone inside unconsciously adjusts their balance. At the precinct, the email went out at 8:03 a.m. Sergeant Brian Kincaid placed on administrative leave pending internal review. IA will reevaluate previous complaints for pattern and practice. No confetti, no grief counseling, just 2 sentences and a CC to the union. Some officers read it fast and closed the tab like it might be contagious. Others read it twice, slower, thinking of stops they'd made in their own tired hours, words that came out sharper than intended, hands that hovered where they shouldn't have. The few who'd always done it right felt relief and a vague, unfriendly pride. The others stared at the screen like it had developed a conscience. Kincaid came in through the side door to avoid eyes, and failed. He turned in his cruiser key, signed a form he didn't bother reading, and set his badge on the counter because that's how the choreography goes, even if it's supposed to be temporary. The badge looked smaller lying flat. The ring of keys beside it made more noise than he thought keys could. When Officer Luis Ortega passed, he stopped like his body had decided before his mind did. "You good?" "No," Kincaid answered, "but I'm standing. Being upright counts." He nodded the kind of nod men use when their throats aren't ready for words, and walked out with an envelope under his arm and the hollow sound of a place that had decided to keep going without him. Times 700 star. In the parking lot, Winter nipped at his hands. He sat, engine off, and heard the sentence that had grown wings and flown home to roost. I probably would have handled it differently. It sounded different now, less like hypothetical, more like admission shaped into a future. 2 miles away, at Camp Resolute, Lieutenant Colonel Maya Carter faced a room of recruits who still wore their haircuts like new shoes. Fluorescents hummed overhead. Training manuals sat like obedient bricks on the back table. "How many of you think a uniform automatically earns you respect?" A few hands rose, hesitant. She nodded, nothing in her face to punish honesty. "A uniform buys you attention," she said. "Respect is rented, and rent is due every day." "What does the rent look like?" someone asked. "Small decisions," Maya said. "The ones no one claps for, the way you speak when you're tired, the way you write a report, the way you check your tone when you could make someone's world smaller or bigger." She hadn't planned to talk about the stop, but rooms can ask for stories without speaking. "A month ago," she said, "a police officer pulled me over on Hillside Parkway. He was loud where discipline would have been quiet. Sure where judgment should have been careful. He asked me to step out before he told me why. I recorded the rest." "How did you keep your cool?" "I practiced," Maya said. "You practice when you don't need it, so you have it when you do." "Were you scared?" "I was aware," she said. "Awareness keeps you alive. Fear makes you sloppy." "Authority without accountability is just a mask for weakness," she finished. "Don't wear masks. Wear responsibility." Afterward, a young woman with a buzz cut and a comma scar waited at the door. "My brother got stopped. He didn't record. He came home smaller. I don't know what to do with that." "Hold space for it," Maya said. "Make sure he knows it was real, and change the rooms you enter so fewer people come home smaller." "I want to be that kind of soldier." "Be that kind of person first," Maya replied. "The uniform should follow." Back downtown, Judge Naomi Whitaker sat with the oversight board, coffee, sincerity, and a stack of verbs. Overhaul bias training with community input. Audit body cam use quarterly with public dashboards. Require written articulation for every escalation. Randomize IA reviewers. Pilot a civilian ride-along review council. "One verdict doesn't reform a system," she said, "but a verdict changes the light. It shows dust we weren't seeing. Once you see dust, you decide, breathe it or clean." A gray-haired member asked it, "Racism case or discipline case?" "Yes," Whitaker answered. "In America, bias hides in tone and procedure. Discipline should protect the public from our filters. When discipline fails, bias gets a badge." Outside, Ella Mendez's piece rang like a soft bell on the Brooklyn Post. When the badge met the uniform. A lead as simple as a courtroom, a video, and a sentence that won't fit back in a mouth once it's said. In a West Side barbershop, men read it on a phone propped against a jar of blue barbicide. A teenager waiting for a fade murmured, "That part." Heads nodded. The sound of agreement landing where it should. IA's office worked with the blunt tools of accountability: spreadsheets, calendars, transcripts, scanners. Marcy Lowen opened old Files and saw patterns you only catch when pages sit side by side, similar language in different hands, fear used as punctuation. Unfounded where uncomfortable might have been more honest. Ortega knocked, then pretended he hadn't. "I want to make a statement," he said. "Not a complaint, a statement about culture." "I'm listening," Marcy said, and wrote culture in the margin of a form that didn't have a box for it. On campus, students debated forums that preached to choirs. "Unseen black stories," one said, "are still stories until someone decides not to look away." And because life insists on being itself, a little boy on a scooter didn't fall and announce to no one, "I got it." A woman watering petunias replied, "Yes, you do." The universe counted that as a win. That night, Maya sat at her kitchen table, uniform folded into squares that looked like intention, an envelope in careful cursive. "I'm 13. I used to think being strong meant shouting. You showed me it can mean standing still and telling the truth." She placed it under a lighthouse magnet and let the room be quiet enough to hear its own heart. Her phone buzzed. "Asha, IA reopened 10. Too significant. DOJ acknowledged. Change your voicemail? It's full. Maya, let the inbox carry the noise so my head doesn't have to. Asha, you're allowed to feel happy. Maya, I feel steady. Asha, better than happy. It lasts longer." In her house, Judge Whitaker circled a line in her memo, "Discretion paired with discipline," then added, "Public dashboards in plain language, no acronym soup." She looked out at a family crowded around a too small table, laughter leaking through glass. Systems mattered. So did tables. As for Kincaid, Hillside, Parkway pulled him back like gravity mixed with shame. He parked where he'd parked that night. The streetlight hummed, indifferent to verdicts. He searched Procedural Justice Training Brooklyn, hovered, and clicked. 30 minutes of a gray-voiced facilitator saying things he'd have mocked in the locker room. He watched the whole thing. On a receipt, he wrote 4 words. Say why, show respect. He taped it to the dash. Not penance, maybe progress. Days became weeks. Headlines cooled. The work that isn't photogenic kept working. IA finished 2 reinvestigations with grown-up sentences. The board announced a pilot for civilian review. The PD rolled out discretion and discipline. Rookies took it seriously. Veterans pretended not to hate it. The Post ran a follow-up, stubborn, not splashy, about policy as the part of justice that lives off-camera. In a drafty community center with bad acoustics and excellent tamales, the town squared its shoulders together. "I don't want to hate cops," a man said. "I want to stop teaching my son how to survive a traffic stop like it's weather." A woman in scrubs. "I'm tired of being polite for my own safety." Ortega, arms crossed, mind open. "Respect is earned in small decisions nobody claps for. And I plan to collect a lot of claps nobody sees." The room laughed. It sounded like relief. On a quiet evening, Maya paused at the courthouse steps, palm against cool stone like a promise to remember. A kid rolled past in a Black Lives Matter tee, earbuds in. The shirt did the talking. She looked up at late-coming stars and thought of names that never made articles or videos, ordinary people who got smaller beneath a system that sometimes forgets what it's for. Unseen black stories are still stories, she thought, and felt the truth settle in her ribs. Back home, she typed a note for tomorrow's lesson. Leadership under pressure. What does it mean when no one's watching? Under it, she wrote, "We were watched. Behaved like we knew it." She struck the second line. Oversight shouldn't be the only reason to behave. Then, a few lines she didn't plan to read aloud. Power unchecked becomes arrogance. Accountability turns arrogance into awareness. Awareness is the first step toward justice. Justice is the work we do when the cameras have gone home. Brooklyn didn't turn saintly overnight, no place does, but the thermometer moved a degree at a time. On Hillside Parkway, a new patrol car idled. A black SUV passed, steady in its lane. The officer didn't move. He told himself, say why. Show respect, and waited for a moment when why would actually exist. In a city that never asked to be brave, people chose it anyway. Voting, filing, showing up, speaking softly, and carrying information. Because systemic racism doesn't end when one room says a sentence. It weakens when thousands of rooms change their scripts. Sometimes late, with the courthouse dark and the servers humming, the files that changed a room's light sat quietly on a shelf of memory computers pretend not to have. No trumpet, no drum, just a record kept. And the last thing the story leaves is not a headline, but a practice. Look at the badge and the uniform, and remember the person comes first. Let a stop become a mirror. Hear a calm voice and answer with discipline, not ego. Choose a sentence that fits in a shared mouth. We can do better. The night didn't clap, it rarely does. It just widened, generously, to make room for the next decision nobody will applaud and everybody will live with. Black Lives Matter. Unseen Black stories. Racism in America is real, so is the work to unlearn it. Systemic racism loses ground when ordinary people choose accountability again and again when no camera is pointing their way. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either the product of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.